Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to Mondays with Mr. Happy, aka Mr. Happy Mondays, the weekly Q&A show where you ask questions and I answer them. Welcome to 2020 New Game Plus, as I've been saying it for the past several days, where we don't say it couldn't possibly get any worse, we just do our best to probably try to come up with a better ending. That's how I think I'm going to run my 2021, at the very least. It's 2020 New Game Plus, just pretend we're doing it, we're doing it over, we'll do certain things better. That's it. I refuse to just say, because in 2019 we said it couldn't possibly get worse, and then 2020 happened. So I'm not saying that. I'm just going to New Game Plus the year, and we're going to be all good to go. Anyway, I don't know how many questions I have. I didn't really check before this, so I should probably just get into that. No spiels, no updates, no anything like that, even though I could definitely say a few things here at the start of the new year. But let me get into the questions. First, thank you to our sponsors over on Patreon who have been supporting the channel, these weekly Q&As, State of the Realm, all that stuff, over the past, well, however long you've been a patron. I do actually have a brief memory, and I'm going to leave this in because I like to. I think somebody pledged recently, didn't they? Yes, and they did send me a message. I'll try to remember to put your name on the list. Mavis Dark, new standard sponsor. Thank you. I almost forgot, but I just remembered right now because my mind's been all over the place the last couple of days. Thank you. And thank you to all of our other sponsors as well. Of course, thank you to our patrons of darkness, Khuja, Janova, and Kurenai Oni. Both of y'all gone above and beyond. Appreciate you two. Appreciate everyone else on the list. And if you're not a patron, don't worry. Enjoy the video because the content is for everyone. But with that, let's get into the Q&A, shall we? All right, this is the first one I could find. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. No hello? We're off to a terrible New Game Plus. There's no hello in the first question. It's fine, I don't care. Thanks for answering my question. I have probably another short lightning round question this week. Will we be doing any more bestiary videos? Our schedule is slammed with stuff. I absolutely love these lore style videos and are great for nostalgia purposes. Hoping for a happy 2021 and hammer healer. You know what? You redeemed yourself there at the very end with the wish you a happy 2021. So, will I do any more bestiaries? I've never ever ruled out doing more of those videos, but I got a lot of the kind of key aspects. Now the bestiary series would have to focus on more, I guess, very specific things. Things that are less franchise-wide and more so just little bits of lore tidbits about various items or NPCs. And you know what? I actually have no qualms with that. But what I've tried to shift away from over the years is I used to fill my channel with stuff for the sake of filling my channel with stuff. I needed to make sure I always had a video coming out every other day, every day, whatever. I needed to have something releasing. And that meant going to a couple of Wikipedia pages, pulling up all the info I could find about this stuff that anyone else could have found, throwing some of the most generic pictures of those things, maybe some videos in there as well, whether they be public domain or actually recorded from my own playthroughs or save files, and throw them into a quick video. And people actually don't mind that. As you said, people like that format. It's nostalgia-driven, and normally there's a little bit of opinion-based aspects in there about how I feel about specific things. But because it was ultimately, as I've described, you know, basically grabbing info off of some sort of public wiki that people have, you know, fed information into, and some of it a little derivative of the things that people either theorized or I theorized or things like that. It felt like basically low-hanging fruit content-wise. I feel like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. And you know what? I actually think it's good to have kind of low-hanging fruit videos on a channel, especially a channel you're trying to grow. I mean, top 5 favorite, you know, worst 5 villains, you know, best leveling systems, you know, my favorites of this. It's low-hanging fruit that the person's clearly passionate about, has an opinion about, and is something that drives discussion. It's something that drives people to engage with the video. It's just a natural, it's basically it's presenting an opinion for the sake of getting people who both agree and disagree with you to populate the comment section and the overall atmosphere of the channel and the video itself. And I'm never against that. But it's been less interesting to me to want to do those as of late. And so I'm always okay with the idea of doing more. People ask me all the time if I'm doing more bestiaries, and I like doing those videos. But whether or not I'm going to do more, I can't really 100% commit to. As for schedule being slammed, I mean, my schedule's more so been slammed with making sure I'm taking care of my own mental health. That's been a big thing after 2020. Taking more time to cook, play with Aloha, make sure he's well tended to. You know, actually spending time, you know, talking to friends over Discord or or enjoying a show that I've skipped watching over. Like I just binged Cobra Kai season 3 and I stayed up till 1 a.m. doing that. I haven't stayed up till 1 a.m. and I don't even know how long. So, you know, just being able to take care of things that make me feel better, that make me feel more motivated the next day. Those have really been big, hard-hitting things for me. So I'm always interested in things, and I'm always contemplating them, but then sometimes it just something doesn't feel right. There's like a scratch that's not being itched. So won't rule it out, but maybe. And I hope you have a happy 2020 New Game Plus as well. This one didn't have a hashtag, but I definitely saw the word question, so I'm going to stop with this one. Hi, Mr. Happy. Hello. See, now we're getting back to the hellos. Hope Savage has been a good experience. Not sure if it's something I'll ever do, but I respect it. Thanks. My question is in regards to Final Fantasy XVI. Do you think there will be a story outside of the main game this time around? I think that aspect well, I think you mean damaged 15. Having a separate movie rather than just normal cutscenes. I think that all gaming universes that are, I guess, cultish in a sense, in the modern day are always going to have some degree of outside media. Now, it doesn't have to be a full-blown movie like Kingsglaive. 15 was a victim of, I guess a victim of circumstance we'll go with, where that game went through such turmoil in its first 7 years of being developed that when they only had 3 years to turn it into something, it led to what we had. They couldn't possibly put everything into a game, so they had to make sure it had DLC, market it as a game as a service, even though it very clearly wasn't. Then they needed to expand the Luminous engine, which, let's be frank, is not great, and I'm kind of worried about that other game they're working on, the Project Avia, just because it's made in Luminous. So unless they've made strides or the PS5 can handle Luminous better, that had some very clear issues with the engine. There's so many problems. They just had to reach out to as many different media outlets as they could to tell as much of the story as they could with the development time that they had. I still wonder to this day what 15, not versus 13, 15 would have looked like if they just said, you know what, take however much time you need. But we saw with 14 what was happening as well. A Realm Reborn had to turn around in under 3 years, and we still suffer from technical debt to this day. 16, I think, it being in the Business Division 3, or Creative Business Unit 3, I think is the official name. It being produced by Yoshi P, it being directed by Hiroshi Takai. I think that game has probably had a better core foundation of its development to the point where they don't need external media. I think we'll still see it, but it's going to be meant to be more promotional for the game than it'll be kind of finishing the game externally. I won't be surprised to see DLCs. I won't be surprised to see a book. I won't be surprised if we see any of that stuff, but I don't think it's going to be as integral to understanding everything as it did with Final Fantasy 15. All right, now this one also has a hashtag. Hashtag Mrhappy Mondays. Hello, good morning, noon, evening, afternoon. That's where I'm at right now. Mr. Happy. Yeah, that's me. I'm the one who answers the questions. What's up? When will we get Ishgard Restoration in Bosnia? So if you watch the live letters or you read the patch notes, it actually gives you this kind of information fairly consistently. We know that Ishgard is 5.41. And we know that Delubrum Reginae, as well as the Blue Mage update, is going to be in patch 5.45. Now, 5.41, during the most recent live letter, they said would likely be timed for January, after the new year. Got to make sure that their staff has a proper new year with their family, and then probably come, I'd assume, the 9th of January. As for Delubrum, I'd expect the second Tuesday of February to be a very likely day for that. So what is that? That's 6, 7, 8. I think that's the 9th off the top of my head of February. So probably those two dates. Probably 8 days from when you're seeing this. So that would be what? The 12th? Yeah, that would be the 12th of January. And then the February 9th for the other one. If not February 9th, then the 17th. Those are my two guesses for the 0.41 and 0.45 patch. What are the chances of Hildebrand? They've said he's on break this expansion a couple times now. So we won't see him other than one little thing that you get to see in the Hero's Gauntlet if you are paying very cllose attention. And RNG'd into him appearing there. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Hey, Haps. Hello. Hope you and yours are doing well. Hope the same for you. Just a comment about an answer from last Monday. Okay, so this isn't even a question, but it could leave it to a discussion. First, the Dragon Quest MMO, Dragon Quest X, is very fun. I've been playing it for a while now, very much a full-on Dragon Quest game in a similar way to Final Fantasy MMO games are for series. However, Dragon Quest feels a lot closer to Final Fantasy XI. Yes, it very much is. Really wish they would bring it here, but that's highly unlikely. Sorry about my rambling. If you haven't made a video yet, would you mind giving a light version of your feelings about the 11 mobile game being canceled? Honestly, I kind of saw it coming. 11, they've tried to put it in the ground multiple times. Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 was supposed to put Final Fantasy 11 in the ground. That was a deliberate decision. Didn't work. That's why they made all the races look so similar. That's why they wanted to make it an easy transition to go from 11 to 14. The joint subscription, getting people to try it out. It was all part of their marketing plan to eventually phase out what they felt was an old MMO that was, on its last legs. They tried to kill it again when they announced the Vandal project or whatever it was called, where they were going to have 2 different mobile games, and they were going to take it off console service, support it for another year, and then they had no idea what they were going to do after that. And Final Fantasy XI, the core people who play it, not so much new players, not so much, returning players, as much as just the core people who have stayed with it for the most part, kept it alive. It kept it profitable. It motivated the team, and now it just doesn't make sense for them to really bother preserving it in the form of a mobile game. Now, here is the flip side of that. I don't think we're done with another Final Fantasy XI game. Ultimately, the biggest problem with Final Fantasy main numbered MMOs, this includes Final Fantasy XIV, is that at some point in existence, they very likely have to disappear because they are just unsustainable, they don't make any money, or the interest has weaned just that much. It doesn't matter if it's 50 years, obviously I'm just throwing numbers, don't take these seriously. Let's say 50 years from now, everyone who's playing like this is no one playing anymore. They're gonna need to take it offline. It's gonna happen at some point or another. But they are going to want to preserve these games in some form, whether that be a single player game, a mobile game, whatever. So I think at some point in the future, maybe not any time in the next decade even, we may see Final Fantasy XI release a single player version of its story. Now, not talking about Final Fantasy XI single player mode where you're playing through what we currently see as 11, but a remade game in Vanadil's world. And I would say the same would happen for Final Fantasy XIV at some point as well, because these are main numbered Final Fantasy games. They're going to want to preserve the stories that are told, the worlds they've built, the lore that they've written. It just makes the most sense to then take it and put it into a single player format that is either turn-based or, action-based or whatever, something like 7 Remake. Who knows? Who knows what they would actually decide to end up doing. Dragon Quest X probably never going to come to the West. For, like you said, Dragon Quest X is very much a Final Fantasy XI-esque game. Now, for a couple of reasons. One, I don't think they want another MMO in the Western market to compete with its other 2 titles, especially one that competes more directly with Final Fantasy XI, which, while it is, alive and it is receiving attention and dev support, is not thriving. So adding something that's similar to it but more updated in the Western market could actually damage Final Fantasy XI's playability and availability. Not that anyone couldn't just find a way to play it with a VPN anyway, but that's a totally different story. The other reason is that it's very popular in Japan because of certain design aspects of it. Dragon Quest as a whole is more popular in Japan than it is in the West. Not to say Dragon Quest hasn't been doing well in the West. Dragon Quest Builders did really well. Dragon Quest XI, of course, did really well. But it is ultimately a title that they probably would have a hard time convincing a lot of single-player people to try it out, even if they are a fan of Dragon Quest XI. And then, of course, with it competing with the other 2, those 2 reasons together are probably a reason we won't see it in the West. So playing it with a VPN is going to be very likely the option most people opt into if they really want to play it like yourself. Hey, Mr. Happy. Hope that I don't know why I just dove into that question. I didn't say okay, another question. I didn't hit him with another one, but you know what? That's a-okay. Hope the turn of the year means good for us all and happy belated. Thank you. And yeah, I hope 2020 New Game Plus goes pretty well. I'm really looking forward to ending B. This is an opinion question, but I still feel like it's worth asking. So in that regard, do you feel in what regard? Oh, in the regard that it's an opinion question. I was like, huh? Do you feel it'd be better if new skills were transformative, like for Flare and Holy becoming Scorch? Or for them to add entirely new actions to add entirely new actions. They could do this rather than axing a few old ones to prevent action bar blow. I think it really depends on the skill. I think there are plenty of skills in Final Fantasy XIV that could probably benefit from a whole transformation. Blizzard 2 becoming Freeze is a pretty apparent one for me. Fire 2 becoming Flare. Well, yes, Fire 2 and Flare and Blizzard 2 and Freeze do not have the same function. They just, you pretty much avoid doing them at the higher levels, but you'll still use them if you're synced down to a really low level. So that's a big thing. I think that some jobs could definitely benefit from that more. And I'm sure there are other jobs and changes they can make that automatically make it better. Also, the charge system being introduced to more skills, like Bard having charges or stacks for bloodletters. They can hold more than one. I think it really depends on the skill. I don't think there's one approach that's automatically better. But they definitely, I feel like, have only weighed this like 50 to 60% of the way about what they could actually transform with. And they still need to find, I guess, the rest of the way and look at the remaining skills to see if they can do that with anything else. The only thing I'm not a big fan of is combos becoming one skill that just, goes 2-3 times and it's all on one button. It's okay for PvP, I feel, when you're trying to be hyper aware of the situation. You don't want to have to think about, pressing a 16 button opener. But in PvE, everything's very, very static. The little bit of RNG that's there isn't usually much to deter the way that you're going to approach playing your job. And I think asking the player to be more attentive trumps being able to make everything one button, because I'm not a super big fan of it. I don't like it in World of Warcraft when they have very few button rotations, 2-3 buttons for some jobs if they are optimizing and macroing and things like that. I've never been a fan of it, and I really don't want 14 to go down that route that far. I think they've done it with some jobs, but they've done it tactfully enough to make it still feel very Final Fantasy XIV. Machinist and Dancer are two that come to mind in particular. Monk, even with the changes, or I shouldn't say even with the changes, after the changes, also feels very good in that regard. So, yeah, per action. This definitely has to be answered on a per action basis. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Hi, Haps. Happy New Year and belated happy birthday. Same to you. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess, yeah, belated happy birthday. I don't know when your birthday is, but yeah, belated happy birthday too. Both those to you. Quick question. Do you think they should allow players to zoom out the camera even more without mods? It used to be fine, but some mechanics are, and a growingly taller boss, it's really difficult to see some mechanics. So, I actually, a part of me says yes, but not much further. The other part of me says that I really should probably adjust my camera angle. One thing a lot of players may not mess around with too much in their camera options is how centered the camera is to your character on a vertical scale. So you can push your character down more on the screen and like kind of raise the camera up to see more of the boss and more of the arena. And that to me largely solves the problem. I'm just someone who really likes my character as close to the center as possible. So it unfortunately kind of undoes that as an option just from a preferential standpoint. I think there's a limit to how much I want it to go back. Sometimes the camera can go so far back, I look like an ant on the screen, and that's not super satisfying to me as a player. But honestly, my bigger advice is just being able to understand how much attention needs to be paid at any given time. So you use the E10 Savage orbs. For example, I'll turn my camera towards a side of the room that I know that if I see an orb there, that's mine, no matter what. Like, it's just, that's how we've set up our priority system. And then if I see two orbs there, then I know which one is mine. Like I'm the westmost orb, for example. But if I see just the one orange there, I still know it's mine because I'm just looking in the right spot. Some of it is, yeah, it'd be nice to have the camera, but I've also made sure that I understand the mechanic and the way that things can possibly be placed in such a way that I don't need it to be any wider. I just need to make better use of the space that I already have. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Hello and Happy New Year. Same to you. Hello and Happy New Year. Why does Square not give a way to tell apart their dots from other players? They do. Yours will be in the front of the boss's hitbox, and the countdown number is a different color. Now, I will say, as someone who's colorblind, I would like the option to change what that color is. The difference, I don't even actually know what color it is. I just kind of, it looks like fuzzier almost to me with my colorblind eyes, but they do. Yeah, it'll be the first debuffs on the bar, unless you're doing something that has like an ungodly number of people, like the hunt, where it gets screwed up anyway. And they'll have a different number under them. Now, of course, like you've listed here, you do have the option to turn off other players' debuffs, but that comes with its own problems. I agree, I don't like using that setting as all. I like to know when people have used Addle, have used Reprisal, things along those lines. I think the timer on the personal dots is slightly green, yeah. And then, you're basically saying the exact same things I'm saying. I wish I could adjust the color, or the color was more friendly to colorblind players. So we're on the same page, but they do have ways, they could be improved. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Hello and a belated happy birthday. Hello and thank you. Long-time follower, first time I'm sending a question. Welcome. Hope it's a good one. Nah, that's fine. With regards to the stat crunch we're slated to get in either 6.0 or 7.0, how exactly do you foresee this being implemented without completely ruining the game? Well, fortunately, all stats, all boss calculations, all balancing, it runs through a calculator to some degree. They know what their jobs are capable of based on calculations, based on testing, and they just have to adjust those numbers accordingly. Now, they may not adjust certain things like enrage damage, for example. If they want an enrage to kill you, they might just leave it as something that's way out of the scope of whatever your stat crunch allows. But everything's run through a calculation. All the bosses are balanced based on the calculation of the job potential at the time, and then they throw that out the window when they're developing stuff for newer expansions. They need to focus on the new calculation, the end game level range for that. And then you sometimes overpower those old things anyway. So those old calculations, they were relevant at the time and they're not anymore. It's pretty much the same. They formulate a brand new calculation in which they can determine, per job, per boss, per enemy, how much damage needs to be dealt, how much damage needs to be received. They test it, they tweak it, they find the right spot, and that's going to be the number you see for the newest stuff. The old stuff, they backscale as much as they feel like they need to, and then you end up just still completely overpowering that stuff like you did before. And it requires a lot of tedious work, because you still do need to make sure that those numbers are something that's appropriate to the level range. But you have to calculate those anyway, because you have to consider what stats are going to look like from 1 to 79, or in the case of an expansion, if we're going to 90, 1 to 89. You need to know how those stats are going to look at those levels, which means you need to be able to adjust those monsters as well. It's a lot of work, but it's nothing that's... ultimately, it's so numbers don't get so crazy out of hand that... they got to fill up the screen with millions or billions or too many zeros. It reduces clutter. There's all sorts of reasons why you would do something like that. But it is just a matter of running everything through calculations, running it through testing, and then executing it at the end. And it is also something that is adjustable after the fact. And they actually don't give us very big item level jumps between expansions. I'd say our item level jumps are relatively tame, especially compared to World of Warcraft. We only go up throughout the whole expansion after we've hit max level. We go up, an extra 30 in the point 2, an extra 30 in the point 4, and we're done. It's barely anything at all. They just do that initial item level bump at the beginning of the expansion, so it feels good when you hit level 80 and you do those first few advancements of your gear. But our item level gaps are actually way smaller than one might expect, so much so that sometimes gear that is outclassed item level wise might still be good enough if its substats are really, really good. It has its pros, it has its cons, but I'm not that worried about them doing a number crunch. I'm only curious how far they'll take it with things like old enraged mechanics, and will they make those now lethal to those level ranges? Will they still make them survivable? Because they have to revisit those as well if they're going to do number crunches. So just big question marks across the board on stuff like that. All right, next question. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Hi, Mr. Happy. Hey. For the past couple weeks, there's been 2 big threads on the 14 subreddit regarding the state of healing. It feels like no one can agree the best way to go about addressing healer balance. Seems like the thoughts have been divided into 3 main camps. Make GCD heals the main source of healing, and have OGCDs boost the efficacy of those heals, and have bosses output more raid damage to encourage more healing. Never going to happen. 2, go full green DPS and give healers a more robust DPS rotation. Definitely not going to happen. 3, keep everything the same as it currently is with the primary. It's 3. I can already tell you, because I don't even have to read further. You're going to ask me which one I agree with. So here's the thing. The game has been set up in such a way where the only way you can achieve 1 is if you lowered the GCD to 1 or 1.5. You can't have that with a 2.5 GCD, because it makes basically any mistake a lethal mistake. Right now, a mistake can be, maybe you panic last second, fix it. You can't do that if you're going to make everything... You can't do that. You can't increase the amount of damage the whole game deals and leave it like it is now. You'd have to change both of those things. Probably never going to happen. It would definitely take away a lot of the uniqueness of Final Fantasy XIV's combat, how it is essentially turn-based GCD with the length that it has. A decision has very, very big ramifications if you pick the wrong thing. Thus, your decision-making needs to be a little bit more on pace. Unfortunately, if you increase the pace of the game, that becomes even stricter of a problem. Can't have it. They're not going to make that change to the GCD. They're going to you're probably never going to make that change, thus they can't really make change number 1. 2, go full green DPS, give healers more robust rotation. Definitely not going to happen. They've specifically moved away from this because it is a huge gate for newer players to participate in the way that Final Fantasy XIV's healing is designed. In that, when a new player picks up a healer, they expect... I am going to have more healing buttons than DPS buttons. Whereas before, they used to have a plethora of DPS buttons, and then they'd have some healer buttons, and it'd be like a 30-70 mix, and now it's like a 10-90 mix. You know what I mean? So they understand what their role is, but then the player base can educate a player about how the healing is actually functional, how to optimize OGCDs so you can use GCDs on DPS. And then you have the GCDs for comfort or for problems where OGCDs simply cannot solve it, or just for the learning process, I suppose. So then what happens? We get number 3, where DPS rotations are very simple and your gameplay is focused around optimizing your OGCDs so you can use GCDs on DPS. It gives Final Fantasy XIV's healing a different problem when it comes to new players, in that it's very difficult sometimes to show them that when you're looking at the numbers of how many skills are DPS versus how many are heals. But the other problem is if you go 2, you're going to completely lose. You're going to lose way more healers than I think people realize. Unfortunately, Reddit is not the place to have this discussion. I say this a lot. A lot of places where people do have discussion are the places where the discussion is least effective. Because while people will very often bring valid options, valid points, they're also such a small portion that those opinions do not reflect outward to the general player base. Great example. I was a huge advocate for normal mode, the normal mode raids, being closer to what they initially promised. A coil difficulty that players would have to earn their way through because it was just too easy. And that Savage should be that next step up, because quite frankly, the game needed more challenging content. The amount of backlash I received from the players that normally stay quiet, the ones who don't really project their opinions onto these things, was enormous. Because these players are normally just casually enjoying the game, having fun. They like normal mode. They like being able to experience the story. They like having something that is not as stressed as Savage or raiding. And they like being able to enjoy the game at a pace. I think that's what a lot of people forget. You need to be able to enjoy the game at a pace that's most comfortable for the majority of players. And I don't think option 1 is going to go over very well. Newer healers are going to be completely annihilated by the amount of damage they deal if they were to leave the GCD exactly as is, and I don't see them changing it. And number 2, that's going to completely throw off any new player who just doesn't get it. They said, hey, I picked a healer, and then you just give them DPS tools so they have a more robust DPS-like strategy. Now you could probably wonder, well then why do tanks have a more robust one? It's because the only time they're a tank is the fact that they have the boss and when they press a defensive cooldown because they're taking big damage. That's it. They can meet both of those identities at the same time without compromising one or the other. Healers do not have such a privilege. So I think the way we have it now is correct. That doesn't mean it couldn't be made more fun. That doesn't mean that they can't make jobs more interesting. The means with which that a player accesses power is very important to the job fantasy, and that can always be improved. So I think people should focus on that as opposed to focusing on how to rewrite the whole system, because that is way less likely to happen. All right, and with that, I think the rest of everything can kind of go into... There's no spoiler questions for this one, so I think the rest of everything can kind of go into a lightning round-ish. Let me scroll back through real quick, because I know I saw something that I left. Somebody asked, like, if we have a Dark and a Gunbreaker, what would be the best tank for main tanking and ultimates? It depends on the ultimate. If it's a level 70 ultimates, Gunbreaker's a monster. If it's level 80 ultimate, it doesn't matter. It's whatever you can play well. Quite frankly, even if you're doing the old ones, all that ever matters in this game is playing well and probably not stacking the same job or roll too many times, like triple melee, one ranged, or, triple ranged. I mean, triple anything really. Double caster is pretty normal, but you'd still generally want it to be 2 different casters, like a summoner and a red mage, or a black mage and a summoner, or something like that. So it doesn't matter. Whatever they're most comfortable playing, that's the job they're going to perform best on, is the job that they play. And it's something I always encourage when new players start playing. Oh, hey, Aloha. You want to be in the video? Hey, come into frame. Aloha, come into frame. Come into frame. Hey, come on. Come into frame. Yeah, your whisker's in frame. Aloha jumped up. He's got his bed. That's what this is right here. This little thing that's been here the whole video. I put Aloha's bed right next to me so he can chill out. Let's see. My other question, somebody asked the question, what options do the devs have for another heal? I mean, there's plenty of options, and mind you, they don't have to go with something that already exists. Gunbreaker, the weapon, the Gunblade, exists in Final Fantasy VIII. The one that Thancred uses is from Final Fantasy, or is designed based on the Final Fantasy VIII design. But Gunbreaker's not a job from Final Fantasy games. Squall is technically a knight, which translates to paladin. That's what his official classification is. There you go. Now you're in frame for a second. So there's not to say that they can't even just take a concept. I mean, Astro is a job that is in Bravely Default, in Bravely Second. It's in Bravely Second. I don't think it's in Bravely Default. But it originates from Final Fantasy Tactics, which is the only job that preceded it, and it's something an NPC, an uncontrollable NPC is that job. They use one ability, which I believe is the Astro LB3, and that's it. And they made a whole job off of that. So I wouldn't limit it to they have to use like an old job. but they have multiple options. They also don't have to keep a job the same role. Like Dark Knight, most people associate as being a DPS, and in Final Fantasy XIV, they made it a tank. So you don't have to worry too much about that. And then we had another one. Do you think they'd ever just get to 4 of each job and stop adding them? I think there is a point where they stop adding new jobs. I don't think just getting them to 4 and stopping is really 4 each, I should say, and then stopping is ever in the plan. I think they know they always need to have that something, that new hotness to like get people playing. And that the more jobs they add, the more they learn about balancing them, about adding them, and that'll mean that we'll see new jobs still for quite some time. I don't think they'll stop at 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. They'll keep going after that, but if they don't kind of get close to that, then adding another job starts to seem like it's not fair to a particular role. Like, oh, they never add jobs for that role, or they add too many jobs for that role. I think that's really the bigger designation that needs to be looked at. Was there another one? Do you think 7.0 they'll do it as a soft reset point with the way 6.0 looks like it's going to be going? And do you think Yoshi P will sail off in the sunset? No, I don't think Yoshi P is going to leave anytime soon. I don't see him stepping down from that role at any point. People have suggested he should, and that he should direct a single-player game. He's staying on 14 and producing a single-player game. And I think that that's very much his own choice. I'm very sure he had a choice about what he could do if he could choose to direct that or just produce it. And that was what they landed on. So, no, I don't think so. No soft reset point. You just start telling another story. Final Fantasy XI has ended twice now, pretty much, and they're telling a new story now with Voracious Resurgence that follows up across the game's actual ending. They said this is the end. It literally thanks the players for the years that they've played the game, and they update that every year to reflect the new dialogue. So, and they're following that up with a new story, so they can do whatever they want. As long as you are willing to tell a new story, there always will be a new story. Always be some other evil dude. Do you think the next expansion is going to have a lot of references to Final Fantasy IV because of the events in 5.4? I think there will, but not in the method with which you are describing in your question. I have my own theories around speculation about what's going to happen. We talked about it briefly in the most recent State of the Realm. So I would definitely give that a watch, our spoiler cast for 5.4, because there's big discussion there about the events of 5.4 and where we could potentially see those leading. What else? Is there another one? I don't know. No, it's not a... why can't Astros change stances mid-fight? Because Astro's there to fit one of 2 roles, either being a regen healer or a shield healer. You can do 2 of the same one. The double shield healing, definitely not as good as the double regen healing, because damage mitigation is more important than heals over time. But, I mean, yeah, no, it's because they don't want you being a jack of all trades, because then you would just say, screw the other 2 healers. This one healer's god tier. They throw DPS cards out. They can do anything. You don't even care who the other healer is at that point. And why don't shield stack like regens? Because mitigation is more important. Surviving taking 0 damage is one way to eliminate any need for regen healing. So whenever I, as a scholar, can hyper mitigate something to the point where nobody even loses their health bar, it's like, why even have the other classification? If you could then swap between and shields could stack even further than they already can, then it would be absolutely ridiculous. So it's a good thing they don't have it that way, because that would definitely be worse for the state of the game than, especially for the state of balance, than the way that we have it now. Do you think they'll ever do a graphic overhaul of 14? Yeah, I mean, we'll see it with new versions of DirectX. Like, I suspect a DirectX 12 version of 14 is probably on the way. And that's very likely where you'll see it, but not just a general graphics overhaul. This is more like an update using the new engine. I think you'll continue to see that. We saw it with DirectX 9 to DirectX 11, and we'll probably see it with DirectX 11 going to DirectX 12. They'll also design things with, newer ideals in mind, new hardware in mind, but they also have to make sure it runs on something that a casual player can own. If a player doesn't own a high-end PC, or if a player doesn't own the latest of the 2 of the generations of consoles, the most recent 2, then they need to make sure there's an option for whatever their game is available on that it can play on those things. They already removed 32-bit support. You can still play on it, just they won't support it anymore, so you won't get any more updates, and it could potentially break. But they're going to try to keep it largely to as many people as possible, and I don't think a graphic overhaul is much in their interest right now. An engine overhaul, which could come with some changes to the graphics, maybe, but not something that it's almost like it goes from being what it is now to being like a hyper realistic, like cyberpunk-esque graphics. You know what I mean? And then was there another one? that was here. Something about 14 making no effort to teach you how to play. Reading is hard. No, reading is easy, but that doesn't teach you how to play. Reading a skill and understanding what the best way to play is, what the most optimal way to play, are two very different things. Like I said with the healer question before, you can give a healer a bunch of DPS spells, a bunch of healing spells, and they can understand how each of them works. But if you don't understand how that actual role is going to play in the realistic, end game content of 14, you're going to be the healer who's spamming cures on the tank every 2 seconds. Every time they miss health, cure 1. Every time they're missing health, cure 1. And you see it all the time. Like, oh, I'm a healer. I'm not supposed to DPS. That's what the game tells me. A game isn't communicating to me that the player base expects me to do this, and that that's generally considered the optimal way to play, and that I can improve with that knowledge. It'll just give you information. It'll present to you effects, but not with which the way that's best to approach them. Nobody knows what song orders they're best. You have to apply a lot of critical thinking, not just reading, to understanding. That's why we have people who theory craft. That's why we have people who sit there and do vacuum math calculations in discords and stuff like that. Because they're the ones putting in the legwork so other people don't have to, because the average person doesn't, or doesn't have an interest in doing it in the first place. So it's not just about reading. It's not just about the pace at which skills unlock. It's about understanding core aspects of the game and core expectations that the game expects of you with these things that you've accumulated. And I think that was actually the last one. Somebody made a comment about Gaius being there for years and we just got Gunbreaker. I guess in response to me saying they probably won't do Musketeer because it's been so long. Gaius isn't a Gunbreaker. The Gunblades of Garlemald are not like the Gunblades of the rest of the game. And they're very specifically made mention of this, that their Gunblades are really more like, what's the name of the... bayonets. That's the thing. They're more like bayonets than anything else. So that doesn't really work for the argument, but I understand where you're coming from for that. But anyway, I think that is the last question that I had to answer. There's some other reactions, a few happy birthday wishes. Thank you. And that's going to be a wrap for this episode of Mondays with Mr. Happy. Thank you for asking your questions this week. If you have a question, put it in the comment section of the video below, and I'll do my best to get to them either in a lightning round or in a more thorough answer. But thank you, everyone, for watching this week's episode. I will see you next week for our second episode of Mondays in 2020 New Game Plus. I will see all of you then, and until then, take care.